tangibly, I think a lot of the developed world, which we often kind of fairly lazily think of as being at the frontier, no country is at the frontier. The US is one of the most technologically advanced countries. It's one of the richest countries, but there's still loads and loads and loads of businesses and people in the US that are not doing they are doing things that are much less productive than they could be doing for various reasons. And every other country in the developed world is further behind than the US is. And one of the really, really big constraints is where people can go and who people can combine with. This is driven by housing constraints in cities. So most prosperous cities in countries are quite a lot richer per person than the rest of the country. If you took London out, the average GDP per capita in the UK is lower than Poland's. Now, that's not that interesting or useful as a fact, because taking London out is taking out 10 million people and taking out the 10 million most productive people. So yeah, of course, if you cut off the top, 20% of a country, then it's not that surprising that it's poorer than another country where you haven't done that. But this is true across the world. There are cities in Ireland, Canada, the US. Most European countries have this, and certainly most developing countries have this, where cities are a lot richer than the rest of the country because they are huge pools of talent. They are huge pools of people, and that allows businesses to set up there that are much more sophisticated than businesses that could be set up in much more sparsely populated places. And it also allows people to combine with each other and come up with new ideas. So it also drives forward tech growth. And so when we don't build enough housing in cities like that, what happens is people are prevented from moving who would have moved otherwise, who haven't changed really their skills. They might change their skills once they get there, but a person could have exactly the same skill set and be stuck in, rural County Cork, which is where I'm from, and just moving with the same set of skills to Dublin or London, doing a job that maybe wouldn't have existed in their hometown or in where they come from. They can earn much, much, much more money, and they can produce much, much more value or output for the economy. So one of the things holding back growth then in many places is the fact that we have these really productive economies. We don't let people plug into them. And as a result, those people are poorer, everybody's poorer. So that's housing. Transport infrastructure, I think, is another really important part of that, because obviously you need transport infrastructure for people to get around. In many cases, it isn't actually more housing that you need, it's easier ability for people to move around that you need, because you can have incredibly sprawling places where it takes hours to get from one place to another, that kind of on a map or, from space, they look like a city, but when you actually get there, they are as far apart. Functionally, they are as far apart. They could be, hundreds of miles apart, because it just isn't practical for people to travel back and forth every day. So better transport infrastructure, more roads, more free flowing roads, railways, underground, things like that, trams, sometimes buses. That can be a really important part of allowing cities to grow, or allowing cities to kind of become more integrated economically. And then a kind of final element that I think is important in a lot of countries is energy, which isn't to do with people, but it's to do with physical production. And it's also to do with, a lot of digital production now, obviously. AI relies on a lot of energy. But energy is kind of the one common component to almost all production, to literally all production, but it's an important component to almost all production that we do. And so my kind of argument, or my way of thinking about countries that are rich relative to the rest of the world and rich relative to history, but not rich relative to the richest countries and not rich relative to what they could be, is that they have a lot of catching up to do. And that catching up requires the sort of basic economic building blocks of what they're doing to be easier to use and to be more plentiful. So people, by far the most important resource in any economy, but also energy. I think less important than people. And if I had to choose to get cheap energy or to get cheap housing and transit, I'd definitely go for the second one. But energy is still really, really important. And especially as certain technologies like AI or like advanced manufacturing, which can be very, very energy intensive, become more and more significant for various reasons, some economic, some geopolitical. Kind of solving energy appears to be a really, really important part of catching up as well. I mean, it is important to stress that all of those things also relate to scientific and technological advancement, right? Most breakthroughs happen in clusters of certain industries or in university departments that are basically clusters of people. It's very rare you get a big breakthrough, except in like agriculture in the countryside. It's not unheard of, but it's rare. And allowing people to locate with each other allows for more knowledge exchange. And so not just catch up, but also frontier growth can come from this. But my contention is that we could have dramatically more economic growth in a very short space of time simply by fixing housing, transport, and energy in the developed countries of the world, at far more growth than we could ever hope to get in such a short space of time from technological advancement, as important as that is in the long run.